Shapes.
No.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. I thought it was flow, but it's just
Colin,
slows down.
Sorry?
Colin Pegasus. The history behind that name is old and long and uninteresting.
Yeah, it's kind of like a
I
bonsai.
have no judgment with it.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
So anyway, my name is Mark Atwood, and I'm the Director of Open Source Engagement at Hewlett-Packard Cloud Services, and I mainly focus on OpenStack. And I put this session together because we kept getting asked about it yesterday. So I'm going to try to have this little bit more discussion than presentation. If you want to see this in presentation form, my coworker Liz is going to be presenting it Thursday. Thursday is part of OSCON, and this is all online. All the documentation for it's online. We'll go into it. So OpenStack is one of the largest and one of the fastest growing open source projects in the history of open source projects. When it's a little open source project, it's very easy to be very fast growing. But when you have 120 contributing companies, I think we're passing 500 to 700 individual contributors in the arbitrary 30-day window right now. We're just passed through 170 commits a day.
Mark, I think you need to stand like facing me.
I thought he was mostly focused on the audio. So
Not anymore.
How your sound travel, how your voice travels is.
All right, so I will turn this into.
Repeat those numbers.
It's I'm vaguely remembering that it's over 200 contributing companies now. I think 170 commits a day is what we pass through. Over 500 to 700 individual contributors in any 30-day window in the last development cycle. The project is growing explosively still, even at this size. At the 170 commits a day, every single one of those commits is fully tested, and the full test cycle takes 2.5 hours.
Depends on the project.
Yeah, yes, but you'll notice there's not enough hours in the day, and the OpenStack contribution process and development process was formed partially in reaction to some very bad anti-patterns that formed around earlier open source projects. Specifically about MySQL, about the Java community process, and some other early projects that had high hopes or high hopes for a company, and while they worked, they were very, very frustrating. So with that little bit of background, I'll run down a quick flow chart of how the process works, and if anybody has any questions, if it's a short question, jump right in. If it's a long question, wait until I'm done with the quick breakdown of how it works, and then we'll start pulling this apart and talk about it more. The center of your life when you are an OpenStack contributor and developer is review.openstack.org. The code review process, Garrett, is the center, not the source control process, Git. When you're working on one of the sub-projects, you check it out of Git, you make your change, and instead of doing a get push, you do get submit. Get review. You'll have a plugin for Git that does Git review. It pushes your contribution up to a special Git tree managed by the robots at review.openstack.org. It does a quick smoke test on the software, and then it pushes it into Garrett, and then it's available for review. Anybody who's a member of the OpenStack Foundation can do a +1 or a -1 on any given contribution.
And I checked, you don't need to sign the contributor license agreement to do reviews.
So Garrett is a code review system. It was written by people at Android Software before it was bought by Google, and then Google rewrote it in Java. But it's flexible and customizable enough that that's what we use. It works very well with Git. It works very well with the rest of our tools, including Jenkins. We're pushing Garrett so hard and doing so many awesome things with it. We're pushing it farther than Google takes it internally, and Google has stopped taking our patches, so we might have to fork it.
That sucks.
Wait, Google not accept the outside patches?
Google, terrible open source.
Right,
company.
yeah.
For as much as they depend on open source, they're one of the worst they're right up there with Microsoft, being a bad open source company. That's probably just about to get tweeted and get in trouble.
Off the record.
No,
It's on
not
tape.
On the record, I'm paid to say this shit.
That's getting tweeted.
So anyway, anybody who has credentials in the system, which is anybody who wants them, can do a +1 or -1 code review. Code reviews can be for such things as, I'm sorry, I'm speaking too loud.
Can you guys laugh in that direction?
Yeah. So, reviews can be, is about the technical nature of it, the direction, did you get your comments right, is your get commit message well formatted? It's okay to nitpick it, especially because we have a social rule about no assholes, so you don't get to be rude when you nitpick it, but you can nitpick it, which does lend itself to pretty good good contributions. The +1s and -1s don't gate the thing. They're just indicators. There's a cadre of people for each project called core reviewers. And a core reviewer gets to do a +2 review. When a core reviewer approves something, then it's unlocked and moved into the next stage where the more extensive test system runs. This test system will take upwards of 2.5 hours for the larger projects, and if it passes that, then the system will merge it to the tip. Yes,
Sorry, a single core reviewer promotes it?
yes.
So just one?
Well, sort of socially, you're supposed to have two, but anyone can actually hit the approve button. It depends on the project, they sort of.
It's a little stricter than others. This is the rough outline of how it works. Where the core reviewers come from is as people are get some social cred, being a +1 reviewer, the core reviewers will notice, and I'm not sure how automated and versus how social this process is, but eventually if you're a really good +1 reviewer, then the core reviewers will evaluate your work and discuss among themselves or vote among themselves. Each project has their own process for this. Invite you to be a core reviewer. You don't get to be a core reviewer by dint of who you work for. You can be hired. You can be hired by HP. You can be hired by Nebula. You can be hired by Rackspace, and it doesn't matter how good you are at Python, how well you know the project that you work for, until the rest of the cadre of core reviewers says you're a good reviewer. You are not a core reviewer. One of the awesome things about having so many companies involved in OpenStack is that the OpenStack development process does not care that your company has a deadline to ship in 3 weeks. So the process is not accelerated, there are no bypasses. The process is the same for everybody. One of the cool things about this is this two-stage test cycle with the review in the middle before it's merged to the tip means no human being has commit bits. The whole argument is ended. Who has right to commit to trunk? Everybody has right to commit to trunk because nobody does. The only thing that commits to trunk is a robot. Yes?
But wouldn't the core reviewers sort of be the commit people?
They're
I mean,
rough-
that's what it sort of sounds like.
that's-
They're the
they're
ones
rough-
that get to actually say it's on this path.
That's true. They are the ones who have that power. But it's interesting because you get that power by being a good reviewer, not by being a prolific or good developer.
And also between you and the review, there's a final set automated tests.
Right, yeah.
No.
I think it's
As a
interesting.
cleaner, you have to sign the CLS. As a reviewer, there's no additional things you have to sign.
I like the idea of being a lead on the project, not necessarily being like the lead developer, but like, I think that is a cool distinction.
This came out of an observation that Brian Aker made as we were putting the Drizzle development process together, which was the forebearer of this process is the person with commit bits is a janitor, not a developer. This also evolved out of what we saw worked with the Linux development process. Linus's job is not to write code, it's to do final review of what its code captains do. Its code captains, for the most part, don't write code. They review code that comes up from developers. They just do it all on a mailing list and using social tools. We automated the whole thing. One of the other interesting things about this is tip always works. That's why we call it the gated trunk. You can always check out an OpenStack project and build it, and it will pass all the tests that are in the system. This means that releases are more of a social construct than a technological construct. Most all of us, especially if we've done proprietary and closed source software, have gone through the merge hell month right before a ship date. Never happens here. Merges happen all the time. There's no merge hell week. Because there's no merge hell week, there's no pressure to bypass the system. We need to get this in before it ships. That's kind of the upshot of it. The way that it works under the hood is we use Git with the Git review plugin, and that pushes things up to Garrett, which provides the UI and the inline framework for the review system. One of the pieces of magic we use is a project written by one of the guys in the OpenStack project now who works for the foundation called Zool. Who remembers the old movie Ghostbusters? Zool is the gatekeeper. So 170 committed, say an hour each to do an in test on it. There's not enough hours to test it. So I'll do a quick run through. Assume that there are 5 contributions that just hit the queue at the same time when the system's from cold start. Zool will spin up a bunch of open compute instances from one of the donated companies that are helping support this thing, and will test trunk plus A. Spin up another set of instances and test trunk plus A plus B, and so on, A plus B plus C. It will opportunistically test all the stacked up patches. If they all pass, then yay, it worked, and it will commit trunk plus A plus B plus C, all 5 of them in order. If any one of them fail, then it will keep, it's like say C fails, it'll keep the test up running of A and A plus B. It'll throw away A plus B plus C and C plus D and C plus D plus E, throw those away, shunk, and start a new set of test instances, A plus B plus D plus E, and so forth. It's opportunistic testing, and it depends on the fact that today computation is very, very cheap, especially when you're a cloud computing provider donating the Computronium for the project that your own cloud depends on.
So this is all done automatically?
All automatically. Machines can solve.
Okay. Is Zool able to be run separately from Garrett?
Yes, it is its own process. Garrett has an event stream. You SSH to a port, and it starts giving you events in JSON format about what's going on, and you react to it and tell it what to do by sending events back to it. Interestingly, this event stream is open to other projects. There's a side project called Smokestack, which I haven't dug deep into what it does, but they just asked for a copy of the event stream. They get the event stream, so they get a notification when a new commit has gone in and when a new commit's being tested, and so Smokestack, monitoring that stream, can pull that change itself, run its own tests, and then advise the test system whether it passed or failed, and it shows up in the it shows up as just another +1 or -1 reviewers. So people can actually write more reviewer robots and more tester robots, and they don't have to be part of the foundation. They don't have to be part of the OpenStack infra team. You file a bug against our issue tracker saying that you need access to it, and as part of your bug metadata, you tell it what SSH public key you'll use, and boom, you get access. One of the cool things is this whole system is just another OpenStack project, which means it itself runs through this very process to change itself. If someone finds a bug or wants to add a feature to how this development process works, you should probably socialize it and talk it out with people, but then you just check out OpenStack Infra, you make the change, and you submit it, and it will go in for review. And if it's approved, and submitted, the next time the system restarts, I don't know how often that is.
It depends on the project. So if it's just a change to a public configuration file or something on the system inside, that'll happen within like an hour of it being committed. If it's a change to something like Zool, we have to go through a Zool restart in most cases, and that is actually a big deal because you have to shut down everyone's.
That happens on every cycle. Yes.
How many core reviewers do you have? And when we're talking about 170 patches, like I get the robots being fast, but you still have people.
There's 12 to 18 in Nova, Lore, and Infra. Each project is different.
Okay.
The way OpenStack's underlying in some architecture is it is loosely coupled but running in close formation set of independent projects that are speaking RESTful HTTP calls among themselves. And they're all under the OpenStack legal umbrella, and they all have access to this test system, which encourages them to all work somewhat the same way, especially as they all get tested the same way. But each one has its own set of core reviewers. Each one kind of has its own socialization of how development works. Each one has their own meetings, and that sort of thing. It's to run a project this big with this many people with this many interests, it cannot be centralized. So we just decentralized as much as we can, including and the decentralization of the technological infrastructure mirrors the decentralization of the project itself. This whole process is, it depends on the existence of an OpenStack to use, but it's not really super tightly coupled. It's even more loosely coupled than most of the others from the OpenStack system. We're already talking with a couple of other large open source projects. The two at the top of the list who we can talk about are MediaWiki and KDE. They are both very interested in switching their process over to this. If you have a large enough project that you have this many contributors, that you can have enough contributors and reviewers, and it's important to you that it work correctly all the time. And more projects are reaching that point. If you have more than 4 or 5 developers and you don't have a gated trunk, what will happen all too often, the more larger your project gets, the more often it happens is someone will check something into tip that breaks it. And then nobody else can work until it's fixed. And that stopping issue gets more and more common the larger and larger your project is. One of the other things that drops out almost for free when you do it this way is now that you have continuous integration and you can verify that the tip always passes all the tests all the time, it's just one more step to continuous deployment. If you know it always works, why don't you just constantly deploy it in your production systems? Yes?
So this may be a branching question, but you haven't really talked about, so where do the tests come from? Because that's usually the challenge.
Actually, one of the things that is when you do, that gets socialized in when the tests get added. It's also socialized in the development process. When you contribute a feature, one of the things that will happen with reviewers will say, that's really neat, where's your test cases? Some of the sophistication underlying the system and the way this works is that contributions don't have to be worked out by one person. You can do a contribution in, someone will notice one that's saying it's not working for the following reasons. Everybody can see that in the log, and there's the Git URL, so that someone else can just check out your contribution. So you can actually, from that point, start working with 2, 3, 4 other people. And so you can keep working on your thing while someone else writes the test cases and someone else writes the documentation. None of this is really possible without distributed source control, and then you just keep cross-merging back and forth to each other until you're all happy with it, and then somebody submits it in. Yeah.
There's also a separate QA team that sort of has more broad across the project, because if someone is adding a lot of tests to their project, it's going to add a really long time to the game for everyone. So if that starts happening, they're sort of more like they're to socialize and be like, listen, like you can't run this many tests in the gate because it's going to take way too long to take up time. And they're also ones who tend to work with external people who wanted to add more like smoke tests and other things.
My favorite is actually just recently had this conversation on a developer list where somebody was saying, oh, we can't do automated testing, we can't do fully automated testing, it's too much trouble to set up. And then later on, somebody submits some new test cases and we can't accept these new test cases because they're making the manual testing take too long. And I'm like, dude, you are so 1998.
We would love to see every major project use something before it's flexible enough.
Speak up, Mark.
If you're already using Git, it's very easy to get into this sort of system, and it's just a matter of socializing socializing in your developers.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've got I already tried to pitch Garrett for PostgreSQL, but we have a major case of NIH. And so we're actually now building our own thing, which has about 3/4 of the feature set of Garrett. But I mean, ultimately we have an infrastructure team and they do all the work on the infrastructure, and If they really don't want it, then, if they really don't want it and they're willing to put in the time to build something else.
Garrett is not perfect.
Yeah.
So
Well, neither will be what we end up with.
Is this documented somewhere? I know you're saying you want to have a
it's
project.
extensively documented, both the architecture and the philosophy behind it, and the runbook for debugging it, and also the runbook for standing up your own. It's,
So going back to
Where is it?
ci.openstack.org.
going back to the test case question.
yes.
So one of the challenges we have with test cases is that the sort of module level test case and the source level test cases are relatively easy to enforce from a developer. The system level test cases, where you're really talking about the entire system or the interaction with other systems, ends up being a much harder problem.
We can't, that is always a harder problem. We can't solve that problem for you. All this system does is remove some of the excuses for not doing it, but it doesn't make it perfect.
So you could still get a trunk build that, although passes all the tests,
Still
doesn't work. It breaks
So
somewhere.
that is true, and that's being worked on by the people who do the unit test system, and that's also the reason why both HP, Rackspace, the others that do continuous deployment still have our own final. We're not going to break our customer systems tests up before we go to before we deploy. And there is some semi-back channel conversation between the company, engineering teams of the companies that do that. We may end up having that. May add yet another test phase, and we can open source all of those final acceptance tests and start sharing that information as well.
Question about opportunistic testing and the decentralization of commit control. I can imagine how that would work for kind of routine contributions and gradual feature adds and so on. But how has that worked with more strategic stuff like refactoring and major commits?
Once again, it helps to you socialize what you can do among the other core developers and core reviewers, and then it's actually the way that typically works is someone does the initial commit, knowledge that's going to get -1 because it's not done. But they might -1 it themselves.
We added a patch in Gary to put a work in progress bug or line. That's one of the patches that Google won't accept. That's not, you're not doing that. But if you upload something, you want people just to review it, it's an initial proof of concept, you can just add a work in progress tag so people know that it's not, like, they don't want to review it for final, they're reviewing it for discussion.
One of the cool things there is work in progress, and Zool doesn't try to opportunistically test it. But now you publish the URL, the other team can pull from it. Yes.
So this might not be a concern for OpenStack, but for us, we have some holistic considerations. As in, for example, adding a single new keyword to the parser is not a problem, but adding 100 new ones is a problem. And so one of the big things that goes on in the whole sort of integration process is, thinking about if we accept these 7 different patches, how are they going to affect the system as a whole?
And that's where stuff comes up in OpenStack.
Speak up, Mark.
When OpenStack, that sort of thing happens, it gets tagged work in progress or -1, and then now you take it into the discussion forums for the interested parties and if it's a big enough change, it may get bumped up to the technical committee for that project or for OpenStack in general to work out what is the right philosophy and approach to take. This is all just the CI system. OpenStack has its own separate technical governance system, which this influences, but is its own thing as well.
And they do things like decide what we're going to test on. So right now we're running tests on Ubuntu 12.04. And that's a decision made by the technical committee. They say, we are going to make sure it works on this platform and that platform. And run these tests. So they have some control over what they want in our gate.
Yeah. It wouldn't really integrate the system. We actually do one area we do extensive automated testing is we actually do breadth-wise platform testing. We actually wrote something a while ago before like Jenkins existed called the build farm, which basically just runs our regression tests on as many platforms as possible. And it was actually surprisingly easy to get lots of project supporters to donate 1 hour a day on the test machine to run these things. And so we get people testing on things like Solaris 8 that would otherwise not see any testing at all.
Yes.
Say that a company wants to contribute to OpenStack and join the usual way. Since you're running fairly idiosyncratic protocols, although most of us know about them by now anyway, and technology, what kind of onboarding mechanisms do you have available for newbies?
Well, that depends on being onboarded into what. There was just a hackathon, trainathon in New York for getting people onboarded into the continuous integration and gate system with the eye towards getting people other than HP employees who understand it well enough to be part of the core reviewers for it. Each of the different projects kind of socializes its own onboarding into development.
How did that go?
It's been going pretty well. I think part of what makes that work is that this automation system causes making minor contributions, initial contributions so easy. It's easy for people to onboard themselves. There's also an entire OpenStack project, which I pretty much forgot, which is a no-op project. It resets like every 24 hours or something. And so it's there just to practice doing this contribution process.
So if I'm joining the project, then I would be reading documentation, I would be getting socialized on mailing lists, or would there be a mentor knocking on my door?
So most generally, if you are familiar with say you're familiar with the compute module, you want to contribute something to it. There's a how to get involved page on the wiki that links you directly to the Garrett review system page, and it's mostly we don't. As a developer, you're not really going to be you won't know about Zool and Jenkins and Garrett. They'll be around, but you don't need to know about them. What you need to know is Git, and then instead of doing like a Git pull or something, you do Git review to actually submit your change. So you'll need to have an SSH key, you'll need to have Git set up, and then you'll need to hit Git review to send it up. So most developers, especially new ones, they have no idea how this whole review system works. They know that they submit something to Garrett through the Git review thing, and that like an hour later they'll come back and people will have reviewed it and magic happened. So it's only when things break or when something doesn't work, and it'll spit out logs, like system logs. I think it sends you like the syslog and a few other logs depending on the tests. So if something fails, that'll be linked in Garrett, the review system. So you can go and look at the log and say, okay, that's where it went wrong, and that's what you can fix. Or this isn't my problem, what broke? So then you can come to the infra team and say, something broke. I have no idea how this system works, but tell me how to fix this. So we get a lot of that.
You mentioned something there that I glossed over really fast. It's both the smoke test and the deeper test. When those robots do their tests, they push the test results back up into the contribution metadata available at review.openstack.org, so you can see the test logs, you can see your error messages.
This one is great, actually.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of dashboards. Like if you want to see where your changes in the merge queue, there's a whole dashboard to look at that if you're really interested. But most people just sit around and wait a couple hours, and they're like, and if they wait more than a couple hours, they say, hey guys, what's up?
And Garrett, of course, has robots sitting inside pound OpenStack on IRC all the time, so it's keeping the community notified what's going on. I think it actually sends you a private message in IRC as well.
It doesn't. It says your name
So you
in
see the flag
IRC.
against your name.
Highlight on that, and then it sends you emails all the time too. It says like, oh, I put this into your review, so you'll know when the initial tests are done. So then you can ask people, hey, Jenkins said this was okay. Go review it now. And it'll also say like someone +2'd it and approved it, so now it's going to go through the gate, and then it tells you every gate step it's going through via email. You can turn it off, but by default.
Another one of the cool things going on is we use Jenkins because it does kind of what we need, but Jenkins has its own terrible configuration scaling problems. And as more and more features go into Zool and the rest of the automation and scripting in the CI system, Jenkins does less and less work for us.
Yeah, and I say Jenkins puts comments in Garrett, but that's not true. Zool appears as Jenkins and says that Jenkins said this change, but it's
Can I just ask a quick follow-up?
Yes.
Do you use wikis as well extensively if you have so much automation going on for socialization purposes and for answering questions?
So the robots don't write to the wiki.
I know, but I'm thinking of humans almost, we try to be robots.
I think it depends on the project. Like on the infra team, since we have all our documentation at ci.openstack, and making a change to that is we hit git review and update the changes. It's pretty easy for us to make changes to our documentation and our core documentation, so as a team, we don't use the wiki that much, but it depends on the project. Like for us, it's really easy for us to fix our documentation. We don't need to be doing that all the time. But for other projects, they may use the wiki. We use Launchpad.net for our bugs. This is just a historical thing. I mean, the bug system's pretty good there, but a lot of people came from the Ubuntu world, and that's the system they use.
The Launchpad gives us both bug tracking and also keeps track of our identity system.
And blueprints. So blueprints are what we use to decide what we're going to do throughout the cycle. So you'll say, like, I have a proposal for this change I want to make in this cycle. So you create a blueprint for that, and then you assign people to it and bugs related to it and things. So we use that more than we use the wiki, so we'll use blueprints.
That's really interesting.
So this is part of the second half of the thing. This development process affects the affects the way the community works. A lot of the community process was lifted from the Ubuntu process. The 6-month release cycle, face-to-face meetings every 6 months, the blueprints, the use of Launchpad.
Few number.
Mark, so there is one great advantage to having documentation as part of your source code in Git. If you want to require that new features are also documented when they go in.
You can reject a review because it hasn't been documented.
Yeah, so if the documentation is in a wiki system, kind of the tooling doesn't control it that way.
The background behind my question is that I'm having discussions with communities about the usability and advantage of wikis. And I think at one point they're extremely useful. But at this point, I think that they introduce distractions sometimes, unless they're the focus of the project itself. Depends on the project.
It turns into project socialization. I like the idea of both developer documentation and the end-user documentation written in Sphinx format and just be part of a project. I think it could be its own project to run through the same review process, whereas wikis are more for slowly evolving communication and stuff that someone
Temporary stuff.
Yeah, but there are repository, for example, there's on the wiki, Hydra on the wiki, DSpace, many of those things on the wiki, they don't really work elsewhere as well. But for something like OpenStack, that's almost a socialization tool, doesn't really contribute.
Different projects work out different ways of doing this kind of documentation, in part because there's no one right way. People have the tools they like to use, and B, it's OpenStack and OpenStack Infra is, for historical reasons and because it works, is a very federal project. And I don't mean federal as in U.S. government, but the original sense of the distributed interlocking networks of power, influence, and trying many different things. We don't want to dictate to any one project how they have to do things, but as things become obviously more right, the tooling appears to make it easier and easier to do the right thing. This gating and testing process has been engineered, but has also grown up. And as more and more things get socialized into how tests should be done and what should be tested, like I think it's in now. It was finally decided to add to the gate is PEP 8. I think it's called.
There's Flake 8, which does the PEP 8 and the high flakes.
So is the smoke tester will kick your code out before it even goes in for you to get your Python syntax indentation wrong, because it ends the fucking discussion. And that was one of the things that wasn't in there originally, but just kind of had to be socialized or had talked out. And enough people got burned enough time by reading poorly formatted Python to have finally just get consensus that PEP 8 goes into the smoke test.
How do you guys handle the review queue, and does it ever get like too long? And how do you make sure that reviews happen?
If review hasn't been, if review gets -1 and it's not touched by anybody, including its original submitter again after 7 days, it gets marked abandoned. You can still find it, but it's not blocking the thing. If it's not touched for 14 days after the even +1 or -1, it gets marked abandoned. That week is the person who submitted it is incentivized to make sure that that someone follows up on it. We have very rarely hit the point now where we get code coming in faster than the reviewers can handle it. That would be a very good problem to have. We occasionally get surges for things. Usually the a week and a half after the summit, after the blueprints have been socialized around, and people start writing initial code for it.
That's a good question. So how much does that time frame have to do with, I mean, a huge percentage of the OpenStack team are employees of companies, right, doing this as their full-time job. So if it's, kind of a little bit more community driven, should those, do you think that the window needs to be longer?
7 days after it's been touched, and 14 days for someone to do more, it seems to be working. No one's complained about that yet.
And even once it's abandoned, you can resurrect it. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
not like a hard,
Yeah,
like,
it doesn't get in the way visually in the UI. You can still restart it.
yeah.
So
So it's something you can play with.
Yeah, so the way Garrett shows you reviews, it'll show like all open reviews. So if something's marked as abandoned, it stops showing up in that review queue. So when people are going through it, doing reviews, they won't see it anymore. And that's just so people don't keep reviewing something that's long dead. And then also, just to your point, we also have a Python script that runs like every 15 minutes or something called Review Day. And for every core project, it'll show you like the top 10 review things, like what based on like bugs and blueprints and stuff, what certain metrics for each project determined should be the one that you should review. So if you're bored and you want to review something, you can go to, I think it's status.openstack.org, and then click on Review Day, and that'll just show you like the top reviews that you should review. And some projects will say on the mailing that's like, hey guys, we got like 36 reviews here, we gotta get on top of this.
I mean, the reason why I ask that question is because there's a tension between people writing new code and doing new stuff and doing code reviews. And sometimes
It helps in this case if the reviewers and developers it's a much more segregated role.
okay, so the reviewers really are a separate bunch of people, and the developers.
There's significant amounts of overlap. Yeah. You get yourself in a different mind state when you're developing versus when you're reviewing, and you get more credibility in the project by being a good reviewer.
Well, that's a really brilliant form of gamification. Basically, you take the task that people don't want to do, and you give them kudo points for doing the task that they don't want to do.
Having reviewed on OpenStack be the code review system, it really centralizes code reviews in a way that makes it like, if you upload code, you see the review system. Like you are in it and you're reading it and you're using it. So everyone gets used to this interface and used to doing code reviews. So it just becomes part of the process rather than throwing something on Git and waiting for someone to review it. Like you forget about it because it's just something Git. But the review system is part of your everyday process. Yeah.
That's cool.
There's an awesome essay, I don't remember his name, or he wrote a blog post a few months ago about.
Who was that? Sorry.
I can't remember his name. He wrote this awesome essay where he compared the GitHub pull request model to this OpenStack process, and his GitHub pull requests won't scale to this level. They work well for medium-sized projects with a few developers who are receiving a trickle of small patches from a larger community of user developers. So OpenStack uses GitHub as a public mirror for all of the projects, but we don't use any of the other GitHub social coding systems.
And I'm in the middle of creating a Git repository that won't be able to pull from because we don't actually want people to think we're using GitHub like for React.
So the way it works right now is if you run a GitHub and issue a pull request against an OpenStack project, there is a robot that runs every 24 hours by the CI system, which closes your pull request and sends you a URL for how to contribute to OpenStack.
So it turns out
great.
GitHub doesn't allow you to disable pull requests.
But this sounds a little bit like you are living in a different reality than many other open source projects, because I think
We
like
built this from scratch, but other projects could start using it.
most projects do have more contributions than reviews, and they do. But so one question I have though. So did I understand correctly that if I were to submit a patch, it sounds like probably it will just be reviewed within hours. But if that weren't the case, it would still be my obligation to actually ask someone, can you help me with the review?
I think the system. I I'm sure, right, it's been a while since it's been the UI. I think the system says if it's a new contributor, it alerts the reviewer if it's a new contributor. There is some socialization around, be kind to the newbies, encourage.
So you
develop-
prioritize a new contributor.
Prioritize and be gentle with new contributors.
I wish Drupal had that.
That is really a good idea.
How is the signing of the contributor agreement tied into that? Is that automated as well?
So you have to sign the contributor agreement to get the credentials in the review system.
It's built into the review system, so when you log in, you'll have an option like to
So
sign it.
does the reviewer know that this person hasn't signed it, and therefore, I mean, is there any automation of
I don't
this can't be
think-
merged because the person
So
hasn't signed it?
I think the way, I'm not entirely sure, but I think the way the process goes is if you upload your SSH key, it won't actually install it in the system that you, let me pause for a second. So Git review SSHs to the review server. If you haven't signed the contributor agreement, you can't SSH that. Like
You'll get an error message when you get review.
so you can sign up and get a review account.
So
and you
the
can
SSH key installation is gated by signing the...
I'm pretty sure that's how it works, because you can do reviews just through the web UI without connecting it, say, without submitting any code. There was actually a question here.
Oh, sorry.
Well, Josh might have a more interesting question, but say that, two questions is kind of a complex one. One simple question is, where are most of the contributors or operative or interesting contributors located around the globe? Second, which may be impossible to answer.
It is actually possible to answer. I don't have it off the top of my head. We do have metrics. There's a sub-project under OpenStack Infra that calculates metrics based on employer and individual identity. Individual contributors don't have to tell us physically where they are.
That's impossible.
Do you, I mean, like, they don't have to, but you can certainly tell unless they're doing a lot of things to avoid knowing. Is that part of, what, like, can I elect not to tell you in a sense?